Welcome to the podcast, Cory. It's so nice to have you.
Great to be here.
Awesome. So how I usually do it on this podcast is we usually just jump right in the deep end. I may give an intro later on. Um, so yeah, a couple topics that I'd love to discuss with you today are understanding core assumptions we have about ourselves and how that shows up in the emotions that we experience and how we relate to other people, and also how we can be more integrous with ourselves and why that may be beneficial to us and why it may change how we experience life on a day-to-day basis.
Wonderful.
Awesome. So to dive right into it, I would love to just give a little bit of my what I've been sitting with around core assumptions that I hold, how it shows up in relationships, and we can see what talking points arise after that.
Okay.
Um, awesome. So I released a podcast like a week ago called How Subtle Manipulation is Everywhere, where it's like how almost every single one of us engages in subtle manipulation, whether we know it or not. And the core kind of thesis of that episode was that the emotions that we experience arise from core assumptions that we have about ourselves. So within myself, there's like the not enoughness, worthlessness, a feeling of being wrong. These all arise in different social contexts, depending like what situations I find myself in. Different one parts of these feelings of lack or core assumptions that I have about myself get triggered. And they give rise to these emotional experiences. And so the practice that I've been engaging with and was exploring in that episode was how a lot of times, all right, if I'm like going out with a group of people and it's going well, and then somehow that core feeling gets triggered, I'll come home and I'll feel like totally like just like doubting everything I said, or just like somehow the social interaction will feel wrong. And then my practice recently has been sitting with that and just asking myself, what's underneath it? What's underneath it? What's underneath it? What is the story I'm telling myself that makes this emotion feel like the most justified reaction to that situation? And it's just really getting curious about like a lot of these emotions that I experience are me actually unconsciously trying to maintain certain core assumptions that I'm not even aware of. And then a lot of times when I show up with people and try to authentically express these emotions, it's still subtly manipulative because it's coming from trying to feel the opposite of that assumption that I have about myself, rather than just expressing without needing anything from other people. Um, so I'm curious, as I was speaking, what came up for you or how you've been
Wow, a
seeing.
few things came up. First of all, I just appreciate your honesty, like the willingness that you have to look at that already. It's just farther than it's 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 more transparent than most. Let's put it that way. Just the willingness to be like, okay, I'm feeling bad in real time, to be admitting that, and then to go home and be like, okay, what was that? What was that all about? And to actually like almost like a computer processing it, just to run the data and to just find out. It's
Mhm.
something that I advocate for in myself. It's like, I'm going to find out. Even if this is ugly, even if I find the nastiest hidden agenda, I'm going to find out.
Right.
And then from there, we can move. And I think if people embrace the willingness to find out, they cross the 50% threshold of like doing the work. The willingness to find out is rare. Um, and something else you said stood out a bit, which was these emotions, like that a lot of times you're finding that these emotions come just to reinforce themselves. I'm paraphrasing, and I'm not sure if I heard that right, but that you'll have an emotion, and it's maybe this rings a bell, what I'm pointing at. You said it.
Mhm. Yeah. I think a lot of times if I have this core assumption, it's so deeply ingrained in my psyche that maybe I'm not enough. A lot of times the feeling of sadness will come to try to perpetuate that core assumption, or like it just, yeah, it like reaffirms like, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh yeah, I feel sad. Of course I'm not good enough. It's like it's just like this perpetual cycle. And a lot of times the emotion is directly arising from the belief or from the assumption in a way where if I try to make myself feel better without addressing the assumption, it's always going to be like a patch that doesn't actually solve the
Cool.
root.
So if you haven't heard, have you heard of the emotional guidance system?
No, I haven't.
This is like my favorite. When I first found this, I was like, no way. Oh my God, this makes so much sense. So the emotional guidance system is simple, and I recommend committing it to memory as like a law of the universe, at least a law of the sentient universe. And that is, the better you feel, the more true or aligned your thought is. So every thought is attached to some sort of a feeling. And the better you feel as you're thinking that thought, the more consistent with God or consistent with source or aligned in harmony with the universe your thought was. So it's just more true. You're seeing it more clearly. It's more objective. It's more accurate. And the worse you feel, the less accurately you're interpreting an otherwise neutral reality. So you're pasting an interpretation on
Mm-hmm.
things that is inconsistent with how God sees it or how it actually is. So it's less objective, it's more biased. Um, and okay, so let's just stop there for a second. How does that land for you?
All right, I was a little confused, not gonna lie, as you were first explaining it. And I'm curious if this is like what you were saying. What I was hearing is like the core belief is something I'm adding on top of my experience of self or reality. It's not actually true. It's like something I'm adding on top of it. And when I see through it, or I see that reality is neutral, it just is, it's not good or bad, it just is, and that actually generates more positive feelings because I'm not interpreting experience negatively when it doesn't need to be interpreted.
Okay, cool. I think that you're making it a little more complex than it needs to be. When you're seeing everything objectively, you feel amazing. You're in bliss. You're in like nirvana. If you're objective,
Okay.
if you're seeing without any personal intervention whatsoever, you're absolutely blissed out. This is a high level awakening state. No?
Hmm. Right.
So that's accurate seeing. That's objective seeing. That's without the interference of human thought and
Hmm.
interpretation.
So any interpretation is going to reduce the positive feeling because it's less
So
objective.
yeah. Any interpretation already reduces it from that total objective state.
Hmm.
Yet the spectrum is still there. So still you can be interpreting something closer. Like there's a spectrum. You can be
All right.
interpreting something more true, which would
Hmm.
be like I don't know, maybe in your case it's like when you have those realizations like, whoa, I'm not unworthy. And like just to be like, damn, I'm actually amazing.
Hmm.
And I could do anything. These thoughts feel good, especially if it's real, if it's not just affirmations like shouted in the mirror, but when it's like, whoa, you actually kind of you get an insight that like, oh, I could do anything. The world is my oyster. This feels good. And the good feeling, the only thing that a feeling is data about how accurately you're interpreting reality. So the worse you feel is just data. You feel really bad. You're feeling like sad, down on yourself, depressed, lethargic. It seems really convincing in the moment. It seems like you're seeing things accurately. But actually, if you trust the emotional guidance system or subscribe to it even temporarily, if you just try on the emotional guidance system, you'll notice that the worse you feel, the more wrong you are.
Hmm.
You're just wrong. You're like not seeing it clear at all. You're far off, like way far away. You can just be like discredited. Never mind. This is useless. Don't need to entertain any of this. I can go play basketball or what, like irrelevant what I'm thinking right now. It's just not true. And so actually I used to have a little exercise I did in my phone for 10 years probably based on this. Um, and when I was low, like in some sort of a low mood, feeling insecure, I would write questions to myself, basically, like, am I really horrible? Or like whatever I would be like, oh, did I embarrass myself so much by saying this? Like I would just ask questions, like, was there whatever it was, or it'd be questions or assertions. I would just sort of do a little journal entry, sort of.
Hmm.
Um, from that low state. And then when I felt really clear and aligned and available and whole, later I would go back and answer. And over the months and the years, it just became so obvious. It was like, I kept saying the same thing. I was like, no, no, dude. Like, bless your heart that you thought that again, but it's not the case. It's just really convincing when we're low. But so you can kind of prove it to yourself. Like if you actually take it on, you can kind of prove that the better you feel, the more accurately you are seeing things. And people like to make all kinds of cases like, you know, I feel bad about, I broke my arm and I feel really bad about that because it hurt. And, or, you know, something objectively bad happened. So I should feel bad about that. There's a few answers to that. One is when you feel bad about something and it's aligned to feel bad, it doesn't feel bad. So even if you're grieving, but it's appropriate, it feels whole, like it feels true. It doesn't feel like you're not suffering over the suffering, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, how's all that land for you?
Good. Yeah, my initial thought was like, what are the implications of this? What, like, how do I actually use this? And I think you started to answer it with you ask yourself, is this like true? Is this belief actually true? And then answering it in a positive state and like kind of counteracting that belief.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, because what I was sitting with was, yeah, like how do I imagine that some people would hear this and then they would have a negative experience and then they would like try to like repress it and feel positive because that's more true or something. And from what I'm hearing you say is when it's a negative feeling, it's not trying to get rid of it, but it's like bringing a curiosity to it, or all of the stories and narratives and thoughts that arise from that negative state, like starting to doubt them a little bit.
nice.
That in and of itself is yeah, because it's like when when we're in depressed states, everything feels so true. Our thoughts feel so true.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what I'm hearing you say and what feels like really what I feel a lot of resonance with is that the way to get out of that state is not to try to stop the state from happening, but to start to notice that all of the stories that I'm in, maybe they're not true. Maybe I
Exactly.
can have my experience of life, of reality, without believing so affirmatively that all of these things that I think about myself, about how bad I am and how I'm awkward and weird and odd and not enough and worthless, and maybe those aren't true. And and yeah, something I want to bring up too is like the process. You said it's like you did it for like 10 years or something. And I've noticed in myself, it's like it feels like year by year, I'm subtly chiseling away at it. And it's like this very slow progress. And it's like part of me really just wants to like see it as clearly as possible and just let go of it and have this like huge insight where I just realize that not enoughness is not true. But in my experience, it feels more like every month I it feels a little bit less true.
Nice.
And it's just like
Yeah.
slowly and slowly feeling less true, but it's nothing like fast or rapid.
I had this because I have the same bias as you. I like to be a fast learner and like just like crush it and like beast through things and like everything in the rear view mirror. But I like a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I just decided that I'm a turtle. Like I'm a tortoise. I'm not the hare. And like I always get there. Like I always get there in retrospect. But when
Mhm.
I'm trying to like some things I can learn super fast. Any game I can learn super fast. But in terms of like development, it just happens. I just had to sort of admit that this is the way it usually goes. I'm not the, you know, I'm not the Eckhart Tolles of the bunch. I'm the like, you know, I put in the time and over time it pays off.
Mhm.
And one other thing I just wanted to make sure I said. So it sounds like what you're doing with this inquiry that you do after an awkward night out. It sounds a lot like cognitive behavioral therapy. Have you heard that?
I've not had that reflection before, no.
You know about cognitive behavioral therapy?
Kind of. Not really.
I read like cognitive behavioral therapy for dummies once because I wanted to get up to speed on it. And it's basically It's, first of all, it's like one of the very few tools, techniques that's relatively effective, that's more effective than not. So more than most medicines and other modalities, it actually works for people who have anxiety and depression. To
Mhm.
just do the work, to like put in the time on this type of self-inquiry. So there's a handful of questions. I love these questions. I have them on my phone. That just get you to the bottom of like, is this true? Is it true what I'm thinking? Like, am I catastrophizing? Am I labeling this? Am I blowing this out of proportion? Am I whatever? I think there's like 12 or 14. If you want, I can send them to you after. But it sounds like what you're doing. And it does the same thing as just doing this emotional guidance system exercise that I described. It just gradually destabilizes how convincing that low energy is. It
Mhm.
like, it just fucks it up. It like can't convince you so much anymore.
Yeah.
So what used to be really convincing and like the most like complete gravity, like, oh, this is the truth. I have always sucked. I will always suck. This timeline is my timeline. And whenever I feel better, I'm just being delusional.
Mm.
It starts to start feeling like the illusion instead of the positive feelings feeling like the illusion from its perspective. And now this is certain for me. And it didn't used to. I used to have some fits of depression. I never do anymore. Like now, anytime I feel bad, it's like, okay, what am I falling for? Like, what lie am I falling for?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And how I see it is like that. And it's like a lot of times if I'm having a bunch of stories about myself, they're all coming from one thing. Or like a lot of times it's like there's this core there's this core thing that is showing up in all of these different ways and all of these different thoughts and stories that I have about something. And so it's like I counteract all the stories and also inquire to like what is that core story that's making me have all of these thoughts. And like and when I say it's like gradual as well, I've been framing it as like if I just go in my room and do this for like 10 hours, I could get somewhere. But when I go and get triggered by something in a relationship, it's a very easy way to see what is actually there, because every time I get triggered, it's like an opportunity to see what that story is and to experience it viscerally
Nice.
to the point where I like the inquiry feels more effective after it being triggered than it does
Nice.
just sitting in silence and trying to find it or something.
I love it. I have the same thing. It's almost like chasing triggers.
Mm-hmm.
Because triggers are basically, what were we talking about before you started recording? About the gremlin, about sort of finding your shadow or finding your blind spots. And
Mm-hmm.
triggers are where you can find them because we have beliefs about everything. We have beliefs about everything, but they don't matter. Who cares? Those beliefs aren't affecting us.
Mm-hmm.
We have beliefs about gravity and time and space and whatever. Doesn't matter. But beliefs that result in triggers, those are the ones that actually limit us.
That's like
So,
where the attachment is.
right. So it's where we're not free.
Mm-hmm.
So I love it. Like chasing triggers, I think is like one of the most epic lifestyles.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you said that's where we're not free, because that's something that I've been sitting with as well is the more that these assumptions about myself and feelings of lack like rule my life, the less free I feel, because I'm constantly feeling constricted and low energy and low state and sad and depressed because it's like the filter that I'm viewing everything through. And when I am able to see them clearly and let them go, it's like I guess this is what you were talking about with the emotional guidance system is it just feels inherently better. It just feels like yeah, I guess the emotional guidance. I guess I'm starting to see what you were saying more as we're talking, because yeah, a lot of times when I all right, another way I've been framing this process, which I think relates, is when I'm having a trigger where I'm like deep in a story. A lot of times it actually relates to this whole life story that I have about myself. So a lot of times it's like what is the story I have about my life that makes it feel like this is the identity that I need? Is there any way to experience this without the whole life story behind it, and to just like see that that's not true, and then to just experience the trigger without the story? And somehow it feels to me easier to let go of the trigger when I'm not letting myself believe the entire life story that made this trigger feel true. It's like, oh, I was in high school and I was awkward and I was the outcast, and that means that that's who I am now or something. And when I like just like see that that's not here, it's not something that's happening right now, it just feels inherently more true to experience things without it. And it feels inherently more, the more truthful the experience feels, the lighter it feels, and the more free it feels, because like to hold this story about I act this way because XYZ, it like it's like a burden almost, or just like it's just like heavy.
Totally. One thing that can help, a little exercise, a little hack, if you want,
Go for it.
is to admit defeat to the belief. So say your belief is that you're awkward or whatever, that you're unworthy because you're awkward and you always have been awkward. Instead of searching for the counter example, because actually what would somebody who doesn't have that trigger say or think? They'd be like, yeah, yeah, I am a little awkward sometimes. Like, and right? So, but actually just to be like, I was awkward as fuck. And like I still can be kind of awkward and or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what your belief is. I've been a weirdo and I am actually. And but like to just admit it, like to just admit the weirdness or admit the thing that you feel you're sort of trying to find evidence against,
Mhm.
and to see that even if you were, it basically not only accepts yourself, it accepts that trait in the world. It's like, no, I'm the one deciding what's okay and what's not okay. I'm the one that's deciding what's to be accepted and what's not to be accepted. And weirdness and awkwardness, and that's to be accepted. That's fine. I actually am sometimes. And people can be that way. And it's okay if people are like that. And it has
Mhm.
nothing to do with any judgments that follow that. It has nothing to do with unworthiness. Even if it's unworthiness, you'd be like, I am unworthy. You can do it to anything.
Oh dang. I was about to respond and be like, yeah, even with awkwardness, we can choose to see that as like that is not, because I'm awkward, that does not mean that I'm not enough. But then you just took it a level deeper and was like, oh, and the not enoughness is okay too.
Yeah, I'm not enough. Or whatever. What's like the worst thing? But because what that does is it's like if you're I don't know, it's like you're in business with somebody and this is just being like, no, cool, you can have it. It's like I'm actually just done.
Yeah.
All good. I don't want to do the transaction anymore. Like I give you my attention and in turn you give me this identity. No, good. I'm unworthy. You can have it. You can keep that.
Yeah. It's like not feeling the fire anymore.
Yeah. No, it's another way to set yourself free. Doesn't, you don't cling to it as like the only route, but I
Hmm.
know people who have like transformed with this.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had so much come up. Let me sit with it for a second. Um,
Take your time.
yeah, I'm not sure where to go with this, but I will say, all right, I guess there's two things coming up. One is, I think we talked about this a little bit before the podcast started, but a lot of this work to me feels like seeing things clearly. What I was hearing you say when you were talking about the business transaction was a lot of times something when we resist something or push or pull against it, it makes it feel so much more real. And when we just stop like engaging in the push and pull, it actually goes away because we're just kind of like letting it be as it is. You can have it. This is okay as it is. I don't need to like um, do so much compensating for it.
Mhm.
And it's like somehow everything I do when I'm trying to prove to myself that I am enough because I have the belief that I'm not enough, that actually like reaffirms the not enoughness because I'm saying you're real and I'm going to resist you and try to not feel like I'm not enough. But actually the resisting is like proving actually proving it true. It's actually fueling the belief. Whereas like it feels like the freedom component is seeing it as clearly as possible, becoming conscious of it to the point where either I see that I'm generating it or I just notice it and there's complete allowance of it to the point where I can act from a place of enoughness because I'm also accepting the not enoughness or something like that.
Explain this last piece. Say again.
Yeah,
I was with
so
you until the, yeah, yeah.
like said another way, when I resist the not enoughness, I'm always it's like also acting from that place because all my actions are a resistance to it. Whereas when I allow it, it's actually like coming from a place of enoughness because, and this is what I heard you saying with your technique was like when I just give into it and say you're right, you're true, it actually like paradoxically ends up coming from a place of enoughness because the
Right.
enoughness is like I'm showing up from a place where the not enoughness
But you don't care.
where yeah,
It's like
it's like
it's like because you were like in it's like the whole world was that business. Like you were just in that business and you were looking through the lens of the business success and you're like, "Oh, I'm good. I actually don't need it. Like I don't need to do it at all.
uh-huh.
All yours. I don't care if I lose this game because that's not the game I even wanted to be playing in the first place. Like you can win."
Right. Right.
And I think that's one of the main reasons people stick with this is a gremlin, I'm unworthy is a gremlin. One of the things we were talking about before.
Mhm.
People stick with it. One of the main reasons is because of sunk costs. They've just already invested so much in this business. They have so much to, it's like they don't believe that they can just be like, never mind. It's like they have to negotiate and take what was theirs and decide what was not theirs
Mhm.
and do the work and heal it and da, 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 da. And often, I mean, in some cases, there's some additional sort of peripheral damage that needs to be cleaned up. But these things they're never as complex as we think. Like the
Mhm.
people who have these awakenings or the people who have real breakthroughs in these, they always say at some point it just flipped. At some point there was a choice. At some point there's a choice. And until then, there's just a bunch of
Mhm.
thinking and strategizing and trying basically. But then at some point, if you just keep at it and you keep your attention, you keep sort of refining where you're coming from, you'll find the choice point.
Mhm.
And this is one of the hacks in a way, like
Mhm.
a shortcut to the choice point is
Right.
to admit defeat.
I like the choice point way of describing it. But yeah, I think it's the same thing I was trying to get at, which is when I see it clearly enough, I see the way that I'm actually choosing to have that assumption. And I can actually eventually, if I see it clearly, choose to not have that assumption.
Nice. Yeah. It's kind of like surgery, like auto surgery on yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. And I like all right, before we started, you also talked about like relative versus absolute and how like a lot of your work relates to this relative process. And something I was sitting with is like, yeah, like there's definitely like I think it's really valuable to engage in like deep awakening work, trying to become conscious of the absolute, but also on the relative level, in my eyes, like the act of like just introspecting is like it almost gets us closer to the work or like I don't see them as entirely different. I'm curious how this lands, because it's like when I see clearly this, all right, if I have this identity of not enoughness and I see it clearly enough and I change it, well, then it almost implies an absolute inquiry as well, because it's like, who am I? If I can just change my identity from one thing to another, I can't be either of them, because now I've been in both of them. And so almost in my eyes, it's like it feels like they just feed off of each other, both of the
Totally.
both of their pursuits.
Totally, they feed off each other. I like how you said that. I remember one of my best, sort of deepest, maybe my first like sort of self-realization experience was after a phase of like extreme discipline, like building up my discipline, building up my confidence, building up my like empowerment,
Mhm.
basically. Like just becoming on point and reliable. And if I said I was going to do something, I did it. And I just experienced myself as awesome and like I can do anything. And when I was in a darkness retreat, actually, kind of amping this up in a darkness retreat. And then on the last day, I didn't meditate the whole time. And on the last day, for 1 hour, I was like, okay, let's do this. And I spent about 45 minutes and I just hit this penetration deeper than ever in any of my meditation before. Sort of my first self-realization experience.
Mhm.
And I have no question that it has to do with just building up the relative work. It's like, yeah, they completely strengthen each other. Sort of
Mhm.
the more, yeah, the more, it's like the more focused you are, the more, or like the stronger your concentration, you could say, the more you can isolate what you are from what
Mhm.
you're not.
Right. Because
Yeah.
the biggest obstacle is sitting down, asking, trying to get at the root of it, and then having a million distractions come up.
Oh my God. Oh, and honesty is crucial with this because if you'll fall for anything that sort of appeases your ego, anything that makes you feel good about the work you've done. Like if you've been meditating and you're like, okay, I think I've gone enough for today. Or nice, or I don't think I can, this is, I think, where it ends for today, or whatever it is. Like if you can fall for your thoughts, or if you can sort of appease yourself or accommodate yourself or make yourself feel good, or um, yeah, you're not gonna get there. But if you can be like, bullshit, like I call bullshit, that's not actually true. Um, and same with exactly what you're describing of like, if you can peel off a whole chunk of you that's not you, if you can be like, oh shit, I was identifying with this and now it's not me. Just doing that once, if you can do that once, it's over. Like, you can do it anywhere. You can always do that now.
Right.
Like, you're not that thing that you're identifying with for your whole life. I mean, really, just doing it once is like you break the veil a little bit. Like you have a permanent light shining through the veil.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to bring in relationships into this, because it feels like they're intimately related. When I'm doing this introspective process, when I'm becoming aware, when I'm seeing the choice point, as you call it, and I'm choosing differently, this, in my eyes, inevitably shapes how I'm showing up in my relationships. And in my eyes, the more clear I become of the identities that I'm choosing, the healthier my relationships get, or the more capacity I have for honesty and integrity in my relationships. Because if I'm not aware of them, I'm always going to be showing up in a way that is acting from them or compensating from them. So when we were talking about how a lot of our behavior is coming from compensating for these feelings of lack, even if whether or not we realize it, a lot of times when we show up in relationship, these the ways we communicate and the emotions that we have that we communicate inevitably are trying to
Get something.
el- elicit a behavior in the other person that makes us feel less lack.
Nice.
And so I'm not sure exactly where to take this, but I'm curious how that lands for you and how you experience being in a relationship with another person, um, platonically or intimately, whatever context it may be, and showing up in a way. I guess the whole thing I'm shooting for is, how do we show up in a way where we're not subtly asking or needing something from the other person, but just appreciating the relationship itself and the experience of being in relationship, and when there's absolutely no asks from the other person.
So cool. I don't think there's a better like boot camp for this work than in platonic and intimate relationships. I really think that's where all the action is, pretty much. And a couple of things come to mind. One is, well, first of all, you won't ever really get there. Like until you are fully like nirvana, like self-realized, no person left. There's always going to be, you can always find more. You can
Mhm.
always find another level of like, ah, fuck. Even if you just really want them to wake up and it's pure generosity, but it's like, I would get joy if you, even if I'm fully blissed out, but I would be a little more blissed out if you would have your awakening. It's still some sort of consumption, no? So like the spectrum of consumption is consumption to creation, you could say.
Well, I don't
Where
understand that. What do you mean
so
consumption?
consumption is like I'm trying to get something out of you for
Okay.
myself.
Okay.
It's like absorbing, leaching, consumption though. It's just like
Yeah. Consuming from the other
yeah,
person. Yeah.
exactly. Versus generosity, you can say, or
Mhm.
radiance, or yeah. So I've been through many phases of this, like many improvements in this, you can say. One years ago, I just saw, like for the first time in my life, I saw how almost everything I did was manipulative. And when you see that once, it's like it was like at least a week of being disgusted with myself and not being able to be with anybody. Like I just was like, oh, like even when I was alone, I was I was like narrating my moves in case someone asked me what I was up to, or like I was aware of how it would look.
Mhm.
I was like constantly in a state. I could just see this whole layer of personality that was just like looking for validation and confirmation and acknowledgement, positive acknowledgement.
Mhm.
So to see that is it has a similar effect where if you can see it, if you can grab it, if you can be like, oh, whoa, that's not me. But I've been just living and breathing that for most of my life. But like I'm actually aware of that. Just to get a little space between me and that whole program is a huge step. So, and I don't think you can do that if you don't have a lot of honesty. Like you have to have that willingness that we talked about in the beginning. Like you got to want to see it. You got to be
Mhm.
willing to find out.
Right.
And most people just don't want to find out. You know, they don't want that alone time. They don't want to hear the feedback. They don't want to find out what's actually going on.
Mhm.
So if you have the willingness to find out, you will find out. So careful what you wish for. Um, and then like nowadays, something I still use just to check. And actually I give this as a tool to people like regularly when I'm coaching people or my teammates or whatever,
Mhm.
is to actually tell themselves, I don't want anything from you. And to tell them that, tell themselves that, but then to actually compare that with how they feel. Just to find out, like, okay, I'm gonna say, okay, I don't want anything from my ex. I don't want anything from my ex. And then just to be like, wait, except maybe so if you can say that, if you can say, I don't want anything from you, even with the person you're sitting across from at the coffee shop,
Mhm.
like there's nothing you could give me. You couldn't, you couldn't, you couldn't give me anything. Like you couldn't make me feel better. You couldn't, you couldn't boost my ego. You couldn't make me feel gratified. Like there's nothing you have to give me. I'm here for you. I'm paying attention to you. I'm here with you. I'm interested. Like let's create like just a radiance, like a generosity in your energy.
Mhm.
So yeah, this is something I think about a lot and I prioritize a lot. Like if I can feel like I'm kind of subtly trying to get um just a reminder like, oh yeah, there's nothing you have for me. The best case scenario is genuine conversation. That
Mhm.
something happens that me being authentic and you being authentic creates something new. And we
Mhm.
can both be inspired by that or 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 curious about that.
Right. Yeah, and it feels like the same thing we were talking about earlier, where a lot of times the ways I want something from another person only show up after I a lot of times I'll have a conversation with someone and then I'll come home and I'll sit with it and I'll feel this like pang in my chest and I'll sit with it and I'm like, why is there this pang in my chest? And it's like, oh, actually the only reason I told them X, Y, and Z was to get something. And when I
Right.
like feel that the only reason I told them something was to feel something in return, it's like not a good feeling at all. It's just like it's like it hurts. It's just a pang. And yeah, I imagine when you say like there's always more until we reach nirvana, I was also getting that like spectrum, the degree thing where it's like, yeah, what degree of more is there, or like how close am I to not needing anything? Because I imagine like, yeah, there's very like needy energies, and there's also like kind of very subtle but like higher awareness of the ways that I need, and maybe it still happens, but there's I like how you put commitment to honesty, because I also see that as like, yeah, without really valuing honesty, how am I going to ever get at like the truth of how I'm relating to people and how I'm showing up? Um,
Nice. You're
and it's
definitely on
like,
a good track.
thank you.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and it's like it's so interesting because like recently I've been doing this work so much, and then in the last couple of days there's just been this frustration of like, why can't I find anything else? It feels so foggy. I'm almost noticing this part of myself where it's like as I'm becoming more honest, there's something that like wants to stop the honesty, or it's like so uncomfortable that I like just start feeling like foggy sometimes, or it's like I don't know, there's like all these things happening that are like I'm sitting with, and it's like now it just feels like the progress has stopped or something like that. And it's just so interesting to me how many layers there are. And
Yeah.
as I've been doing this, I've like read about this for a while and like been thinking about it, but only in the past like month have I like actually been contemplating it. It's very I had this distinction where I'm like, oh yeah, actually just sitting in silence is like one of the best things I can do, because that's when I can actually the truth, the honesty can start to arise. If I'm distracting myself, it never has a chance to arise in the first place.
So true.
Um, yeah, I'm curious. I think you already expressed some of your techniques that you use, but I'm curious how you sit with or how you inquire into like these unconscious motivations, or like what is your process of trying to notice what the motivations are within yourself.
Okay, hold that question. I'll ask you to ask me again. I just had one thing I wanted to comment on.
Yeah.
So when you are doing inquiry into like your true motivations, or you're trying to be honest and you're trying to like sift through these different like layers of thoughts, like you were saying, and it gets cloudy. I know exactly what you're talking about. Like it's just like, wait, where even am I? It's like you're out on a limb. Are you even on the right course anymore? What are you wasting your time?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it almost makes you just want to be like, never mind, never mind. Like, sorry, I went too far. I don't know. Um, this is a crux. Like this is such an important point right there. It's like it's almost like the hero's journey. It's like you're out and you're about to come into a clearing. So the thing to do is to up your power. Like this, and truly like just straight up power. Like I got this. No, no, no. I am on track.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just coming up against something, and my gremlin or my ego is using its best skills to get me to pump the brakes, get a little confused, pick up my phone. I need to go make something to eat. It's like it's just trying to like jam the signal.
Mm-hmm.
So especially if you're on a trail, like if you're hunting something and you're on the trail and then it starts to get cloudy, up your power. It's just important. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
just log that on the back, somewhere in the background, and it might come in handy for you at some point. Okay, so your question was, oh, my
What, how do
techniques.
you, yeah, how do you in your life find unconscious motivations, or what have you found most helpful in the effort to see what the actual motivations are that you have in relationship?
Yeah. Okay. This is gonna be I don't think I've really talked about this before because I'm realizing it's a little subtle. So I'll do my best. So I think um like hidden agendas. Oh, there's different ways I could talk about this. So maybe I'll start gross and then get subtle.
Okay.
Um, so so that when I was describing that moment where I like saw that everything I was doing was manipulative, I was actually doing a practice that led to that. And the practice, I still bring this practice up every once in a while. And it's just, why did I do that? That's it. Just why did I send that emoji? Why did I not? Why did I smile? Why did I say this? Why did I? And it can create almost like a, almost like just like a clusterfuck of thoughts. So I don't really recommend it to everybody. It can be, people can kind of use it to like get anxious. And that's not it's not, there's no judgment. It's just why.
Mhm.
There's no, you don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to, it's just a private finding out skill. Like, why did I do that? Oh, oh, wow. And I remember sitting at dinner across from this girl and she was talking, some other people were there. And I could just feel like the way I looked up and like made eye contact and was kind of, I didn't actually care what she was saying, but I wanted to give her the impression that I was like with her and on her team, like just to create some sort of like camaraderie. Um, and just to be like, whoa, oh my God, I'm constantly manipulating people. I'm constantly doing things like this, like just totally innocent, totally justifiable. Nobody else would ever call me out for that.
Mhm.
Nobody will ever even see it. Like I'm the only person who can find this. And but the whole practice was, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why did I type that? Why did I say it like that? Why did I preface it with, this is just what I think, but here, like it's, you can do it on everything, like your whole personality, like your whole, especially in speech. Like I think especially in communication, it's like, why did I communicate that? Why did I give that little disclaimer? Why did I? So that's a great one. That's a great one if you're vigilant about not letting it devolve into a judgment. Like, oh, I'm just such a liar. And no point. There's no point. Everybody's a liar. Everybody's a fake.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. All we're doing is getting more integrity, more honesty, more transparency. But everybody's a little manipulative shit. And I had something else. I might have to remember how you asked your question.
Conscious motivations
Oh, right.
in relationships.
Okay, so this has been more lately. Um, yeah. So one thing I found when I can find like an incoherent thread, like a mixed frequency, where I'm like nine threads are going forward and then one is kind of doing this. So I'll check it out. I recently found one. I recently found that I still have some FOMO. Like I still have a little FOMO thread that just kind of pulls me like, whoa, I like, instead of staying present with what really matters to me, I'm still kind of like able to be tempted, in a
Mhm.
direction if it's a good enough opportunity or da, 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 da. Um, and okay, so but this is the subtle thing. And what I found, or maybe I just decided this, is in truth, I have no mixed frequencies. In truth, I'm single stream. Like I know exactly what I'm doing. Like ultimately, what I am is the calling that created my life. It's like I have one, even you could say, like when I really listen to guidance, when I really listen to God or myself or source or the universe, there's just one stream of guidance. It's not confusing. So the confusion or the other it's not me. These other things don't even need to be healed because it's not me. I just haven't totally tuned my radio station dial to 100% me. I'm
Mm,
still sort of like partially I still have some lack. I still have some potential lack. So in a way, it doesn't need to be, this isn't, I don't think that everybody can do this. So this is why I haven't said this out loud, and I hesitate to like prescribe this. But it's been cool to see how fast I can shift lately by using this. So finding that little off frequency or that hidden agenda, that little FOMO hidden agenda.
mhm,
I could just be like, oh, this is evidence of me not being fully attuned to myself, being not totally congruent, being not totally harmonious with what I really am. It's me being something I'm not. Like it's me still hanging on to something that's not me. So let me just shift. Like let me just turn it back to me instead of trying to deal with this, instead of trying to heal it or see where it came from or see what other implications it has, or let me just hop timelines, basically, like shift parallel realities. Um, and it comes with an amount of trust that really what I am, not only on like a God, infinite light, enlightened, not only in that way, but like really what I am as a being
mhm.
is single stream. It's like I trust that. So any incoherence, it's not so and I could see how if misused, this would be bypassing. Like
Mhm.
if it could be really easy to take this advice and then use it to justify like bypassing and suppressing and not doing the work.
Yeah.
So it actually relies on a really high degree of self-honesty and trust and like just knowing what you actually are and just having found a little like thread sticking out and being like, cool, not playing that game, like not me. Does it make sense?
Kind of.
Okay.
I think I got like 50%.
Maybe I'll get more articulate about this and make a reel in the next couple weeks.
No, I think I get it. I'm as I'm sitting with it, there's a few different things coming up because I feel like I'm on the precipice of like it clicking.
Yeah.
But it's something like this is not fully how I'm understanding it, but this feels adjacently related, and I think it may help. When I'm You said, all right, at one point you said not going into the full reason why I have this thing and trying to heal it. And I think that's the point that stuck out to me most. And I think that's how like the thread we can take into this because it feels like if I'm experiencing myself clearly, if I have radical degree of clarity around who I am, it doesn't have to be like all the way full like self-realization. But if I'm like experiencing what it feels like to be aware of myself right now as truthfully as I can. A lot of times to feel like a fragmented part of myself and to try to like work on it feels like a detour. And I think that's what I heard you getting at. If I feel like, oh, I feel this emotion, or let's just say like a fear, like I have a fear of coming across a certain way to a person and I don't want to be seen in this way, to try to like heal that and to like go into the whole kind of psychotherapeutic um journaling process around it, a lot of times feels like it's missing the mark, or it's like not actually fully going to heal it. And a lot of
Mhm.
times it's like there's this fear showing up in me with certain sensations, And if I can just stay with the clarity of who I am, a lot of times those sensations can just like, a lot of times the dissonance can like dissolve, not through going and healing the thing, but in just noticing exactly how the thing is showing up in me right now, and just like seeing that I don't need to create that dissonance and then coming back to self is almost what I was hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Does that land with what you were trying to communicate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I like what you bring in of like feeling it in real time. Like feeling the fear or feeling the FOMO or feeling the whatever in real time and just letting that sort of move through. Um, I do think there are some schools of thought that like way overdo that.
Mhm.
Like feel everything, like let it wash through you. The only way over something is through it or whatever. Like where people like almost just linger in sensation and um sort of states they don't want, sort of in the name of not bypassing. It's almost like a reaction to bypassing.
Mhm.
So, but for sure with this, I was like, I probably had 10 minutes. I was laying in bed looking at the ceiling like I often do. It's like how you like to just, were you saying just thinking with no distractions? Did you say
Mhm.
that? Or just being alone, being,
Yeah, just being alone
yeah,
with everything that's present and not like, yeah, needing to distract myself from the
yeah,
experience.
yeah. I usually do it looking at the ceiling for whatever reason that. Um, and it was just like, oh my God, hi. Like, look at this feeling. I actually feel like I could miss out. Like, I believe that I could, like, that there could be an open door for me and I could miss it. And that would reduce the quality of my life or the mission or whatever. Like, it's lack. I believe in some lack. And it's totally reasonable. It's like, yeah, maybe you do miss a door. Maybe that, it's justifiable. I could build the case, but I
Mhm.
could see that it stemmed from lack and I could feel the FOMO. It's almost like a distractibility or like a temptability, like something could impress me, something aside from self-realization and generosity and just radiating. Something could impress me and I could go get into consumption and think I could get something out of following that thread of an impressive thing. So when I saw that, all it took was just to see it and feel it. Just like, ah, that's what it is. Ah, it feels like FOMO. It comes from lack. Nice. Not me. Not me. Definitely not me. There's no lack in the universe. No, like for sure that's not one of the building blocks of I'm not gonna fall for that. It's just the gremlin. It's just the ego.
Mhm.
It's just one of the subtle ways.
Yeah. What I hear you saying now is like, what I'm hearing is almost like, all right, the inquiry process that we were talking about at the beginning, where it's like, what's underneath this? Why did I do this? What I'm hearing you say now is it's almost like that, but like more direct, like just like a little bit more direct. Like I can go through the whole inquiry process, or I can just sit with the thing and just get directly at it. And it's just like, there's lack. There doesn't need to be lack. And let me just go back to not believing in this lack and just experiencing wholeness.
Yeah. So, okay. And yes, I super operate this way. And people have disagreed with me over the years. People have, so I know that there are other approaches, and some people really advocate for, um, like going in and finding out where it came from or like what happened in your childhood. And I've gone through some of those processes with people and I've seen it like I've seen it bring cool things up and cause some interesting shifts for people. And so I'm not against it. Um, I even like it. It's even entertaining. It feels almost like entertainment. It's like interesting. It's like we're spilling
Yeah.
the tea. We're finding out the deets, like what happened. So, and I can kind of feel the indulgence of that. Like when I'm getting into that, like, oh, I don't know, it feels like a soap opera, which is fun and helps. It can help. But for sure, I err on the side of just do the work. Like, let's just do it. What actually gets it done?
Mhm. Yeah, it feels like at different phases of the process too, different techniques. Like if it's just
Yeah.
like just starting out, and like, yeah, well, one thing that came up recently was, why is it so hard for so many people to meditate? And it's like, when you're just starting out, when you sit down and like stop the distractions, everything comes to the surface all at once, and it's just like overwhelmingly like just a little bit more honesty brings up so much, which is
So
why
true.
I think meditation is so hard for so many people. And so it's like at the beginning, when in that phase where like meditation is really hard, maybe the psychotherapeutic is a little bit, yeah, it is a little bit more entertaining, but also like you're going into it a little bit slower, and you're not being exposed to so much
I
of
like
it
that.
so fast. And then I'm almost seeing it, how I frame it is like, once I do enough of that, the degree of honesty that I have with myself slowly increases. And then maybe I get to a point where, oh, I can actually just go a little bit more direct. It's not as painful because I've kind of built the honesty muscle a little bit. Whereas I imagine if some people tried the technique that you're proposing right away, it could just be like
No, oh my God.
overwhelming, too much stuff. Like I can't look at this, everything all at
No, it
once.
triggers people. It really, I mean, I've had some sort of backlash experiences because basically people have to come to terms with, oh, I've been bullshitting, or I've been deceiving myself and others. I've been nasty in my, I've been putting up with like bad behavior, out of integrity behavior. I've been manipulative.
Mm,
And if somebody isn't really ready to just, if somebody doesn't have enough sort of stability in themselves to own that and be like, true, all good. Yeah, okay, now what? But if it's so confronting. So either they have to they have to do something they've never done before, which is to acknowledge and admit and sort of hold space for their own manipulation, their own strategic um, games.
mhm.
Or the alternative is to make the whole thing wrong. It's just to be like, fuck this, like,
Let's take this.
dangerous, or bad approach doesn't work.
Mhm.
And they'll just reject meditation, or they'll reject this type of work, and so I've seen that plenty. So I really don't recommend this. I think it's so smart what you just did. And just to say,
Mhm.
if depending on where you're at, don't push it. Yeah,
Yeah, you can definitely go way too deep, way too fast. That's for
yeah,
sure. Especially in the world of psychedelics. I see it so much. I don't know. It's like
yeah.
not knowing what you're getting into, and then you have a full piercing the veil, and it's just like utterly overwhelming. I can definitely relate to those experiences. Um, all right, the last thing I wanted to touch on, we're talking a lot about how do I show up in relationships in a non-manipulative way by noticing my unconscious motivations and seeing what I need from someone else. I also wonder if you've thought about the reverse. If someone else has a strong, they're coming at me with that manipulation, what is a place that I can get to where it doesn't stick, or where I'm able, it does it have to be like forceful, like don't bring this at me, I'm choosing not to relate, or like in some settings I imagine like a hard cutoff or a hard boundary would be really helpful. But in ways where it may be a little bit more subtle, how have you found to show up in those relationships in a way where it doesn't, let's just say it doesn't work on you?
Yeah. I can hear, if some of my friends end up watching this, they're going to be laughing at this part. Um, yeah, I have like a strong aversion and sensitivity just because the work I've done with myself. So I'm quite sensitive to these games and people. And first of all, I have a super high tolerance. So I don't care so much. Most of the time, I think everybody's manipulative to some degree. It's subconscious. We don't, no bad intentions. There's egos. There's whatever, 7.5 billion egos on this planet. So all good. Forgiven. No biggie. We're all in this together. Um, but there's a line. I do have a line. Um, and the main thing I do is just not what they just to not be controlled, just to, it's like having a high refresh rate, like being like restarting the computer over and over and just being like, I'm free, I'm free, I'm totally free. It doesn't mean I don't commit. I do commit, and I believe in working agreements, and I believe in having integrity and being a good friend and following through on commitments, etc. So those are all values for me. um But if there's any sort of tactic to get me to do something that somebody wants me to do, or whatever, there's so many interesting ways people manipulate, even people exclude each other as ways to, there's a whole world of this. And it's so simple. It just comes back to, am I free though? Am I still free? Am I still aligned? Can I still see clearly? Or
Mm.
have they, it's basically like what other people's manipulation can do is just like warp your field. You know how if like often people have this with their mom where they're like, clean the dishes. And you actually were going to clean the dishes, but now you don't want to.
Yeah.
So it actually, then that manipulates you because now you don't. You don't do something you already were going to do out of alignment because you don't want to cooperate. So, but if you were free, if you can restart, just like, if you can do that, you can still do whatever's true for you.
Mhm.
And I think that's the like that, and it'll frustrate a lot of people. Just your ability to stay free and just like, I'm gonna do what I want. I'm gonna do what's true for me. I have my own guidance. I'm actually already good. I don't need inputs to orient myself in the world.
Mhm.
And when you're free, you're also generous. That just goes hand in hand. So you're also taking care of people. You're also reliable. You also have integrity. You don't need to worry about um, overlooking people. You also listen, you know, so you don't need to
Mhm.
worry about any of those arguments people will for sure try to make to manipulate you.
I really like that.
Yeah.
I think that was a very easy to understand example
Nice.
of the parent asking you to do the dishes, and it's just like how it lands for me is like not being push and pull. It's like if they ask it, I could reject it, or I could just be like, oh, it's not. I'm not gonna allow it to let me to reject it or to like need the approval and attach onto it. It's just like it's like what is the impulse within me, and whatever they
Yeah.
say doesn't change that impulse, and that I act on that natural impulse remains the
Nice.
same whether or not. That's how I heard what you were saying.
Yeah.
Um, Noticing it's an hour and a half. Do you have a hard stop?
Nope.
Okay, awesome. I have all right. There's one more thing I wanted to loop in. I just somehow it just came back up. Initially, as we were talking, I was noticing the connection between this and integrity very clearly, but now I'm not noticing it at all. So I'm actually curious about when we're showing up and we're noticing our motivations and we're noticing other people's motivations, how does this relate to integrity? How does integrity fit into all of this? And how can perceiving the work through the lens of building integrity help us deepen what we already talked about?
Cool. Um, okay, so for me, integrity is, I don't think this is the definition at all, but for me, it has to do with finding the merit, as opposed to the correct answer or what's going to make people feel good or um, doing the right thing or whatever. It's just what's the merit actually? What's the truth? Like what's the relevant thing? What's the um so it's like even if it's your opponent telling you something that is uncomfortable to hear, if you can find the merit in there, like that there's something relevant for you to learn in there, then you'll take that. So for me, integrity has to do with finding out. It has to do with truth. And I always kind of avoid saying truth because everybody has an opinion about that and there's layers. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, but it's basically like prioritizing the facts, you can say, the facts above the relationships or the feelings.
Prioritizing the facts above the relationships slash feelings, which would mean perceiving clearly what's being communicated or something in myself, despite the implications of how it could affect the relationship. Is that it?
So I say that more in like, so say your partner is saying you're being an asshole and you don't want to believe that. You don't want to take that, but you can find some truth in it.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you would rather win or you would rather that your top priority is the merit. Your top priority is the best point, is the breakthrough, is the best case scenario.
So when your partner tells you that you're an asshole, the integrous thing to do in your eyes would be to genuinely intend to see the fact of what they're trying to get at or point at within me, and to sit with
Okay, there's
and
an
sit
there's
with
a
that.
caveat.
Okay,
The
yeah.
caveat is if you're looking for it. So I think for me, integrity, it's like I'm already, my radar is already on high beam for this. I'm looking for more access to freedom, basically. That's
Mhm.
what we all are doing. So even if it's like my partner is telling me I'm an asshole, um, if they're just doing that out of spite or they're doing that to whatever. No, I'm not just going to be like, okay, let's hear it. Let me really work hard to find the most, with the no, I'm going to be like, no, I call your bluff. Um, but because my beams are so like my radar is so strong for merit, I'm gonna find it if it's in there. So for me, integrity is about looking for the truth, looking for the wisdom, looking for the breakthrough, looking for the learning, like
Mhm.
truly pursuing the learning and having more and more discernment about that. So, and for me, this is what makes someone trustworthy, is that
Mhm.
they prioritize learning above their own self-image, their own self-protection, their own reputation, that they actually want to get it. They actually want to learn. They
Mhm.
actually want to grow. They actually want freedom. They actually want more clarity, more wisdom, more light. Like to me, I can almost like categorize people like this. It's like, are you hungry for learning and finding out the truth, finding out for sure, finding out for real what's up? Or are you preserving, protecting, avoiding, hiding, strategizing?
Mhm.
And everybody's strategizing a little bit, but just what's your top priority? And I
And
think
so,
that's
and so integrity is like the intent to move towards that. This whatever the situation brings up, to move towards greater truth, wisdom, and perceiving myself and other more clearly, and having that as the top priority in how I show.
yes,
Okay, okay,
exactly. It's specifically about the prioritization of learning
okay,
above positioning.
yeah. So no matter how much pain or suffering a situation brings up, I'm always going to continue to prioritize that.
Yeah. It's a cool thread. If you keep going, you get better and better. It's like you stop, like you become more and more whole. I don't know how to explain this, but the more you just prioritize learning, it's like, oh, like more of you gets unlocked, and then you're more of a confident teacher. You have less blind spots. Da, 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 da. Like you become just this more. So people tend to think if you just keep trying to learn, then you're just going to stay in this like student role who's constantly like subservient and taking, and it's definitely not the case. Like learning, like just prioritizing learning and growth above all else can get you, I mean, I think it's also what like the great philosophers in history have had in common, like a humility. Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you said increasing discernment as well, because when I think of that example of the student that's always learning, a lot of times the negative view of that is they're always assuming the other is right, or they're always assuming the teacher is right. And it's almost like to truly learn is to increase the discernment of when the teacher is right and when the teacher is
Totally. That's exactly, it's part of it. That's part of what you're learning. It's like you're learning content, but you're also learning context.
right.
And that's actually the more interesting thing to learn over time is the context
Yeah, it's like discerning how to relate to the content, or discerning
and who to trust
the
and
content.
what's relevant for you
Right,
and
right.
what's just who maybe interesting but irrelevant for you.
Yeah, exactly. Um, what came up was also the why did I do that question that you were bringing up earlier. It's like because I was asking myself like, what would it be like to prioritize learning above all else? And I was like, yeah, if I asked why did I do that in most situations, that would definitely put learning as a priority.
Very cool. That'll get you far.
Awesome.
And it already has, I can tell.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You as well. Um,
Oh shit, wait. I did have a call, but she can wait.
yeah,
Wait, I'll just
I
I
was
need
just about to
5.
wrap up. Um,
I told her I needed 5 minutes, so we've got 5.
awesome. Yeah, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. and I'm really content with the direction that we took this conversation and what we talked about. And you have some incredible insights into these topics. And yeah, I just want to say I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I really loved this. Really good questions and such a sincere relationship to this work. So for me, it's super refreshing and fun. Great to meet you.
Awesome. Yeah, so nice to meet you too.
Okay, do I exit?